While not well remembered for his lifetime fame, actor Charles Francis Coghlan left behind a bizarre mystery as to his subsequent whereabouts. Coghlan was a famous Irish-born actor and playwright who came into the world in 1842. His father, Francis, was a prominent Irish publisher who founded Coghlan's Continental Dispatch and brought out Coghlan's Continental Guides. Francis had highly esteemed literary connections, counting Charles Dickens and other eminent writers amongst his friends. Charles Coghlan grew up being trained and readied for a legal career, but while still a teenager, chose to instead pursue acting. At this stage, his father is said to have disowned him, and he left home, after which he and his father never communicated again. Coghlan's acting career began at the age of 17, when in 1859 he acquired small theatrical roles during the summer tour of Sadler's Wells Theatre. The following year he scored a bigger role in the play The Pilgrim of Love at the Haymarket Theatre and went on to act in several supporting roles. His polished performances slowly built his standing as an actor of substance. Coghlan finally began to secure leading roles in major London theatres, and in 1876 he travelled to America as part of the production company of John Augustin Daly, the first recognised American stage director. That year, Coghlan made his debut on Broadway and went on to enjoy a successful career in both America and England over the next 15 years. He reached the height of his career when he was able to stage his own adaptation of a Dumas play entitled The Royal Box on Broadway in 1897. After a stint of bankruptcy and the odd failed production, he and his company continued to tour the US, staging performances of The Royal Box. Coghlan had a long-term connection to Prince Edward Island, which is the smallest Canadian province located off the coast of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. According to local residents, there are many accounts of ghost ships that are regularly seen off the shores, with one witness seeing two of the ghost ships colliding. Coghlan had his happy place on Prince Edward Island, a farm which was his summer residence, in Fortune Bridge, near the eastern tip of the island. He had purchased the place for his periods of rest and eventual retirement, and regularly visited the idyllic spot during his downtime. He had even been heard to say that he eventually wanted to be buried there. In 1899, Coghlan had taken his production The Red Box to Galveston, Texas. Arriving in the city on October 30th that year, he had unfortunately not been able to perform himself due to ill health. As well as probably being quite overworked, he was said to have been suffering from acute gastritis. Sadly, Coghlan was never to return to the stage and passed away on November 27th at the age of 57. After his passing, Coghlan's body was temporarily placed in a metal casket and then stored in a granite vault at a Galveston cemetery to await further family instructions. At first it was decided that his remains would be interred on his farm in Fortune Bridge on Prince Edward Island, which appeared in keeping with his wishes. However, several days after his passing, it was announced through the press that his remains would be returned to New York for cremation. Amidst apparent indecision over the following months, the disposition of the body was still yet to be determined. In the meantime, his mortal remains stayed stored in the cemetery's vault until, nearly 10 months later, the really bizarre aspect of Coghlan's story took place. His casket went missing. On September 8th in 1900, a Category 4 hurricane swept through the town of Galveston. The hurricane carried a wind speed of more than 135 miles per hour and wreaked havoc on the town, destroying more than 3,000 buildings, uprooting massive trees, and costing the lives of over 6,000 people. The disastrous weather event was followed by widespread flooding, which displaced and washed out to sea in the Gulf of Mexico several coffins from the graveyards. One of those was Coghlan's, which had apparently been stowed in an above-ground mausoleum. Funds and resources were gathered together to locate the missing coffin, which was apparently floating around somewhere in the ocean. The New York Actors Club also announced a reward for whoever recovered Coghlan's coffin. The reward went unclaimed for years. Over the ensuing time frame, several false claims were made regarding the recovery of Coghlan's floating coffin. In September 1900, reports emerged of Coghlan's coffin being retrieved near the city of La Marque in Texas. However, on January 4th in 1904, there were newspaper reports of a metallic casket like Coghlan's on a beach near Galveston. A further claim was made on January 19th in 1907, when a newspaper revealed that Coghlan's coffin had been discovered by a group of hunters amongst weeds in a marsh a short distance away from Galveston. On September 15, 1927, paranormal researcher Robert Ripley made Coghlan's floating coffin famous, writing in his column, Ripley's Believe It or Not. He declared that Coghlan's coffin had travelled across the sea from Galveston to finally be washed ashore on Prince Edward Island, where his home was. Coghlan's daughter, actress Gertrude Coghlan, had searched unsuccessfully for 27 years to find the whereabouts of her father's remains until she saw the Ripley feature in the Saturday Evening Post. When she questioned and challenged the source of this information, Ripley Entertainment attributed their account to another famous Shakespearean actor, Sir Johnston Forbes Robertson, who was a contemporary and friend of Coghlan's. The company stood by their account as, quote, to the best of their knowledge. The story went that Charles Francis Coghlan had returned home to his final resting place of choice. The truly incredulous part of this account goes that the coffin drifted around the Florida Keys and into the Atlantic Ocean, then up along the eastern seaboard of the United States, carried along by one branch of the Gulf Stream. This map of the Gulf Stream was used by blogger Ken Wilson to indicate how easy it would be for an object to float from Texas the 2,000 miles to the Canadian Maritimes. A full 8 years after the coffin's disappearance, it was said to have been recovered by fishermen off the coast of Prince Edward Island and not far from Coghlan's farm. According to the story, the fishermen initially hauled the wooden box onto their boat and then realised it was a coffin. After scraping the barnacles from its plaque, they then saw the name of the still famous actor. One skeptic of this account has dubbed the famed casket the homing coffin. Coghlan counted amongst his leading ladies the still legendary actress Lily Langtry, who made a startling revelation in her 1925 autobiography entitled The Days I Knew. She recalled in the memoir that the fate of Coghlan's mortal remains had been predicted to him by a clairvoyant Roma woman. Coghlan, believing the psychic, had made the comment on his last departure from Prince Edward Island, "I will return come hell and high water." Another version of this account indicated that Coghlan had once visited a fortune teller who told him that he would become very famous but expire in the prime of his career. This person told him that his soul would never rest until he was buried on his beloved Prince Edward Island. Despite the many accounts of Coghlan's floating coffin being found, his sister Rose Coghlan stated in June 1922 that her brother's casket was still missing, while locals have denied that he was ever reburied on Prince Edward Island. Coghlan's daughter would have surely eliminated the possibility that his coffin had ended up at the Levy brothers' funeral home in New York as planned. Regardless, any attempt to later verify this would have been impossible after a fire destroyed all records there in 1979. Amidst all the conflicting tales of the destination of Charles Francis Coghlan, the account of his floating coffin, which headed for home, remains an enigma.